At exactly 6:09 a.m., an ordinary security camera captured 11 seconds of footage that would later disappear from every official archive. For years, investigators argued over what the camera had seen. Some blamed a corrupted recording. Others insisted it was nothing more than a lighting defect caused by old fluorescent fixtures. It was easier to question the camera than to question reality. The first witness wasn't a scientist. He wasn't a police officer. He wasn't even looking for anything unusual. He was a security guard, 58 years old, beginning another routine patrol through the underground parking garage where he had worked for almost 2 decades. Every morning followed the same pattern, the same concrete corridors, the same humming lights, the same empty silence. For 19 years, nothing had ever happened there, until one Tuesday morning. Halfway through his patrol, he stopped. Not because he heard footsteps, not because a door opened behind him. He simply looked down. For several seconds, he didn't move. The floor beneath him looked exactly as it always had. The lights above his head were still shining. Nothing around him appeared different, except for one impossible detail. His shadow was gone. According to the incident report, he remained standing in the exact same position for almost 11 seconds. Long enough for the surveillance system to overwrite several normal frames with a moment no one would ever be able to explain. When he finally reached for his radio, there was no panic in his voice, no shouting, no confusion, only a strange calm. "I don't have a shadow." A few seconds passed. Then he quietly added, "Check the cameras." The dispatcher on the other end barely reacted. Working overnight meant listening to exhausted people say strange things. The call was logged as a possible medical incident, nothing more. The recording was archived. The guard was told to wait where he was. If the story had ended there, no one would remember it today. But while that conversation was taking place, the same thing had already begun somewhere else. A city bus rolled straight past a stop it had never missed before. Inside a hospital, a nurse stood frozen beside a newborn child. In a quiet classroom, a teacher suddenly stopped speaking in the middle of a sentence. None of them knew each other. None of them shared the same country. None of them had any reason to describe the exact same impossible experience. Yet within the next 3 hours, reports would begin arriving from across the world. Different languages, different time zones, different lives. Every witness believed they were the first. Every witness believed no one would believe them. They were wrong about the first part, but they were absolutely right about the second. Because before sunrise had even ended, the world had already begun losing something that every human being had taken for granted since the beginning of history, and almost nobody noticed until it was already gone. At first, there was an explanation. There always is. By mid-morning, television studios had already invited physicists to comment on the growing number of reports. The conclusion sounded reasonable enough to calm the public. An unusual atmospheric refraction, a rare interaction between sunlight, temperature, and humidity. Nothing dangerous, nothing supernatural, just light behaving in an unexpected way. For a few hours, that explanation was accepted almost everywhere, because people don't want impossible answers. They want familiar ones. Then, someone performed an experiment that should have happened from the very beginning. Inside a laboratory, researchers placed 2 objects beneath the exact same light source. A volunteer sat perfectly still beside a small potted plant. The distance between them measured only a few inches. The lighting was identical. The angle was identical. Every condition was carefully controlled. If the atmosphere had changed the way sunlight behaved, Both objects should have produced the same result. They didn't. The plant cast a perfectly ordinary shadow across the table, sharp, dark, exactly where physics said it should be. The volunteer cast nothing at all. For several long seconds, nobody in the room spoke. The lead researcher adjusted the lamp. Nothing changed. He checked the measurements. Everything was correct. He repeated the test. Again. The plant had a shadow. The person did not. One scientist quietly removed his glasses and stared at the table, unable to explain what he was seeing. Another reached into his pocket without saying a word. He never took his eyes off the experiment as he unlocked his phone. He photographed the table. Then he photographed it again. Closer this time. The image captured something no official report would ever publicly acknowledge. Two objects. One light source. One ordinary shadow. One impossible absence. The photographs were attached to a preliminary research report before noon. The report never left the building. Within hours, every page had been stamped, classified. No explanation accompanied the decision. No public statement mentioned the experiment. No journalist ever received a copy. Someone collected the photographs. Someone locked them inside a government archive. And, officially, the experiment had never happened. But by then, something else had already begun. Hospitals were calling. Schools were reporting unusual incidents. Public transportation was quietly logging behavior no one could explain. The phenomenon was spreading faster than information about it. And somewhere inside a government office, people had already stopped asking whether it was real. They had started asking a very different question. How much of the truth could be hidden before the entire world noticed it for itself? By noon, scientists had already stopped looking for ordinary answers. The experiment had failed, not because the equipment was broken, not because the data was inconsistent. It failed because reality refused to follow its own rules. While laboratories quietly classified their findings, the rest of the world continued as if nothing had changed. Hospitals remained open. Schools welcomed their students. Morning traffic filled the streets. From a distance, everything looked perfectly normal. Inside one hospital, a nurse was finishing the last hour of a 22-hour shift. She entered a delivery room moments after a healthy baby had been born. The room was brightly lit. Every surface reflected the white hospital lights. As she adjusted the baby's blanket, something caught her attention. A small shadow stretched across the wall beside the bed. The newborn had one. Without thinking, she looked down. Nothing. She stepped closer, looked again. The baby cast a shadow. She did not. For several seconds, she simply stood there. No panic, no scream, just silence. Then she continued working. She checked the baby's heartbeat, completed the paperwork, smiled at the parents, and never mentioned what she had seen. Sometimes the human mind chooses silence before it accepts the impossible. Weeks later, investigators recovered a deleted conversation from her phone. Only one sentence remained. It didn't disappear. It felt like it left. No one knows what she meant. Maybe she didn't know either. Outside the hospital, thousands of people walked through the morning sunlight. No one stopped to check the ground beneath them. Why would they? No one spends their life wondering if their shadow is still there, until the day it isn't. Later that afternoon, investigators reviewed aerial footage captured by a routine traffic helicopter. The images showed the entire downtown district. Office buildings, bridges, traffic lights, trees. Every object cast a perfectly normal shadow. Only the people did not. That single recording changed everything. It proved the phenomenon wasn't isolated. It wasn't spreading from one city to another. It was happening everywhere, at almost the same time. By evening, governments were no longer asking whether the reports were real. They were asking something else. How long could they keep millions of people from noticing what had already happened? Because once the public looked down, there would be no way to make them forget what they saw. By late afternoon, the evidence had become impossible to ignore. Reports were no longer arriving one at a time. They were arriving by the hundreds. Emergency dispatch centers logged unusual calls. Hospitals quietly documented unexplained behavior. Universities contacted research laboratories looking for answers. But one place remained strangely silent: the news. A senior producer at a national television network had spent the entire morning collecting eyewitness reports. Different cities, different witnesses, the same impossible story. She believed it would become the biggest headline of the year. She never imagined it wouldn't be allowed to air. The segment was approved shortly after noon. An hour later, it disappeared from the schedule. She submitted it again. Approved, then removed. A third attempt ended exactly the same way. No explanation, no comments. Only a short message from someone she had never spoken to before. Hold the story. Inside the editorial meeting room, someone crossed out the words, "Shadow Phenomenon." No replacement headline was suggested. The entire discussion simply ended. Later that evening, a printed memo appeared on the conference table. Most of the page had been covered with thick black redaction bars. Only one sentence remained visible. Hold all shadow-related segments pending federal guidance. No department was listed. No signature appeared at the bottom. Only the date. The same day everything began. Outside the building, employees noticed something unusual. Several black SUVs arrived within minutes of each other. No company logos, no government markings, just dark vehicles waiting beside a side entrance. No reporters were invited inside. No cameras followed them. Whatever happened in that meeting was never made public. According to one employee, a man entered the newsroom carrying a thick classified folder. He stayed less than 20 minutes. When he left, every producer returned to work. No one mentioned the missing story again. Years later, investigators tried to trace the memo. No original copy could be found. The digital archive had been erased. Email records were missing. Meeting notes had disappeared. Officially, the meeting had never taken place. But sometimes, the most convincing evidence isn't what survives. It's what someone worked so hard to erase. Because by the end of that first day, one fact had become impossible to ignore. Someone wasn't trying to understand the phenomenon. Someone was trying to control the story. And if they were already hiding the truth, one question remained. How long had they known? Not everyone needed a laboratory to know something was wrong. Some noticed it long before the first reports appeared. They just couldn't explain what they were seeing. Just after sunrise, in a quiet suburban neighborhood, a woman opened her back door to let her golden retriever inside. It was part of their morning routine. The dog never hesitated. Until that day, he stopped at the edge of the porch. His ears folded back. His body became rigid. He refused to take another step. His owner laughed at first. She called his name, held the door open, waited. The dog didn't move. Instead, he slowly backed away. His eyes never left the space just behind her shoulder. The woman turned around. The yard was empty. No stranger, no animal, no movement. Only wet grass glowing beneath the morning sun. She walked across the yard herself, checked the fence, looked behind the shed. Nothing. By every measure, there was absolutely nothing there. But the dog continued staring at the exact same place. Later, investigators reviewed photographs taken that morning. The space behind the woman appeared completely empty. So, why wouldn't the dog look away? That question became even stranger a few days later. Veterinary clinics across several states began reporting an unusual increase in anxious behavior. Healthy dogs refused to enter familiar rooms. Cats hissed at empty corners. Horses became frightened without any visible cause. At first, veterinarians blamed thunderstorms, construction noise, changes in air pressure. Every explanation sounded reasonable, until the reports kept coming. Then came the farms. One ranch owner woke before sunrise and found his entire herd gathered tightly together in a single corner of the field. Hundreds of animals, standing shoulder to shoulder, perfectly silent. They weren't facing the road. They weren't watching the farmer. Every single animal was staring toward the same distant farmhouse. The owner walked across the field expecting to find a predator. There wasn't one. No wolves, no stray dogs, no intruders, nothing. Even after he approached the herd, the cattle barely reacted. Their eyes remained fixed on the house, as if they could see something he couldn't. Investigators would later compare dozens of similar reports from different countries. The locations changed. The species changed. The dates were nearly identical. Only one detail never changed. The animals always reacted first. Long before the first scientist. Long before the first government memo. Long before anyone thought to look at the ground beneath their own feet. Something had already caught their attention. Whatever had entered the world that morning, it wasn't invisible to everything. Only to us. For nearly 2 days, investigators believed the phenomenon had reached its peak. People were losing their shadows. Animals were reacting to something humans couldn't see. Governments were quietly containing the story. Then a school janitor changed everything. He arrived before sunrise, just as he had for almost 15 years. The building was empty. No students, no teachers. Only the sound of fluorescent lights humming above freshly polished floors. His routine never changed. Unlock the maintenance room, fill the mop bucket, clean the main hallway before the first bell. Halfway through the corridor, he stopped. At first, he thought it was a stain. A dark shape stretched across one section of the wall. Perfectly still, perfectly human. He looked toward the nearest window. Still dark outside. No sunlight. He checked the ceiling lights. Every fixture was working normally. He moved closer. The shape didn't move. He stepped to the left. Nothing changed. He stepped to the right. Still nothing. It wasn't reacting like a shadow, because it wasn't reacting to him at all. The janitor finished cleaning the hallway without looking at it again. The next morning, it was still there. Same wall, same height, same position. He never reported it. Years later, his daughter would tell investigators about a conversation they had over dinner. She asked why one hallway in the school always opened later than the others. He answered with a sentence she never forgot. Some things at work you simply stop writing down. You just learn which doors should stay closed. Within a week, that corridor had been locked every morning until students arrived. No official maintenance records explained why. Teachers assumed repairs were taking place. Students stopped asking. Life continued. Because that's what people do. They adapt, even to things they cannot explain. But investigators reviewing the case noticed something disturbing. The shadow had remained in exactly the same place for 3 consecutive mornings. Real shadows don't do that. They move with the sun. They shift with the light. This one didn't move at all, as if it wasn't waiting for the light. It was waiting for someone. By the 3rd night, something had changed. The first reports no longer sounded like isolated incidents. Historians searching through forgotten archives began discovering the same sentence repeated across manuscripts separated by centuries. Different languages, different countries, the same warning, the shadows that stopped following. At first, it seemed like nothing more than folklore, another superstition buried beneath history. But the deeper researchers looked, the stranger the pattern became. Every account described people whose shadows behaved differently just before something impossible happened. Some wrote that their shadow disappeared entirely. Others claimed it remained behind when they walked away. None of the witnesses were ever able to explain what happened afterward. The oldest surviving fragments contained only a few damaged words. The shadow that stopped following. The rest had been destroyed by time. No explanation, no conclusion. Only the warning itself, copied again and again by people who clearly believed someone in the future would eventually understand it. As researchers pieced together hundreds of forgotten documents, another pattern emerged. Every generation believed the phenomenon belonged to the past, until it happened again. Then the reports stopped coming from historians. They started coming from ordinary people. Entire neighborhoods began sharing the same story. At first, it sounded harmless. Someone standing outside a house in the middle of the night. Motion alerts with no obvious visitor. Doorbell cameras recording nothing unusual, until people noticed someone standing just beyond the reach of the porch light. Not moving, not knocking, only watching. Many homeowners assumed it was a prank. Some walked outside immediately. Nobody was there. Then they checked the recordings again. The figure had never moved. Night after night, more cameras captured the same impossible scene. A dark silhouette, standing silently at the edge of the property, never approaching the door, never turning away. Sometimes it remained for minutes, sometimes for hours. Then, without a single recorded step, it was simply gone. People zoomed into the footage, adjusted brightness, enhanced every frame. There were no facial features, no reflection in the eyes, no visible movement. Just a shape darker than the night itself. Some believed it was an optical illusion, until different cameras in different cities recorded figures standing in exactly the same way. The internet filled with theories. Security footage spread faster than experts could explain it. Some videos disappeared almost as quickly as they appeared. Others remained online, gathering millions of views from people trying to convince themselves they were looking at edited footage. Then, one recording changed everything. A homeowner received a motion alert shortly after 2 in the morning. He opened the live feed expecting to find another empty porch. Instead, someone was standing at the edge of the driveway, perfectly still, watching the house. He rewound the recording. The figure had already been there long before the camera detected motion. Frame after frame. Nothing changed. No footsteps, no breathing, no movement. Only the feeling that it wasn't the camera being watched. It was the person watching the recording. From that night forward, he admitted something he had never told anyone before. He stopped checking outside the window, because every time he looked at the footage, he had the overwhelming feeling that eventually the figure would look back, and according to the oldest warning ever written, it never comes to the house by accident. It comes because somehow it already knows you're watching. And if one night you find yourself staring at a motion alert, and you notice a silhouette standing perfectly still beyond the light, don't keep watching, because the last thing many witnesses claimed to see was the figure turning its head and looking directly into the camera.